Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name is Jeff Thomas, and we have a very special guest with us today, Gary Ringer. Gary he was a business guy who also became the founder of Lifesong for Orphans, and he's written a book called Radical Business: From Ownership to Stewardship. We have a lot to cover. Gary, thanks for being with us on the program today.
Thanks for having me.
This is going to be fun. Well, Gary, as you know, we always kind of start out with, what was it like growing up? Where did you grow up? What was your family like? Was there any spiritual stuff going on in the household? Any entrepreneurial stuff? Take us through the growing up years.
Yeah, so I was really blessed. I especially understand this in Lifesong, where we work with orphaned and vulnerable children. I grew up very different than that. I grew up with a wonderful mom and dad, believers. Dad was a businessman, had a small feed business here in Gridley, Illinois, a little town of 1,400 people. Back then it was about 1,000. Dad was a lay pastor, but he had a feed business. We're really taught, from little on up, the gospel, understood it. And I remember just a personal story. I had an older brother and an older sister, and I just remember seeing my brother not really commit his life to the Lord when he was in high school, and kind of worried about him. And then when I got in high school, I really didn't make that commitment till I was a freshman in college. But it was I always knew that the most important thing I could do was turn to the Lord. And so I'm just so thankful for the way I was brought up. And I had they say sometimes that the way we look at God is influenced by our father. And I'm sure that can be, doesn't have to be that way if you don't have a good father. But I had a father and a mother that just loved me and were wonderful examples. They both passed away, dad at 97 and mom at 98.
Wow.
So, and I will say this, the last thing I heard my dad say, and this was very typical, I would go over to the home where they were at, and he would almost always, and this one, him and mom were 97-ish, and he would always say, "Doesn't your mom look pretty?" And he was just loved his wife, my mom, and the last time I saw them before the following week, he fell and broke his back, and then they put him on morphine and he slipped away, which was great. We'd been praying that the Lord would take him home. But the last thing I heard, I was with them in their room. I said, "Thanks for being you." That was one of Dad's sayings. I said, "Thanks for being you." And I walked out. And just as I was walking down the road, walking there, I heard Dad say, "Well, honey, it's just me and you. I love you." That was the last thing I heard my dad say.
Wow.
Before he passed on. So they were wonderful examples.
Yeah, that is a blessing. And sometimes you don't realize it till later because it's all when you kind of see how a lot of the world struggles with those relationships. So we'll get into some of that. But now, did he have you working at the in the feed business, or what was that like? What was working like growing up?
Yeah, so I did some work for Dad, in the feed business, and when I went to college, but I was always my gifts is I'm a creative person. And I don't have very much tenacity. So I always wondered, frankly, if I could ever fit into making a living, because I didn't really like to do anything very long. But when I got out of college, I went to work for Dad in the feed business, and so then I got to know Dad at even a deeper level when we were working together.
Yeah, what was that like? I mean, family business is hard enough. Right out of school, a lot of people say, "Hey, go work for a few years and then let's talk about it." But you went straight, huh?
I went straight, and again, it was partially because I didn't know what else to do. But what I found is that Dad was a good mentor. We had a small feed business where we bought and sold feed, and we served pig farmers in maybe a 50-mile radius or so. And so he would have me go out and talk to farmers, but he'd also have me in the shop mixing feed too. And so, because he knew with who I was, if I went out all in sales, I'd probably burn out. Um,
Right.
but but yeah, it was a um, good mentor, and it was through that I learned to love business. I'll just share this with you, Jeff, that what happened, I was a scared kid at first, but Dad already had a relationship with a guy that was a nutritionist. And what the nutritionist taught me how to do that Dad had never done is instead of buying the feed, if you will, he taught us how to mix the feed
Mm,
and make the feed from scratch, if you will. Kind of like making brownies out of a box or making brownies out of the scratch.
right.
And when we did that, that changed our cost so much that we could basically make twice as much on our main products and still be a lower cost to our farmers. So
Wow.
that was a good combination. And the business started to grow, and we were able to hire salesmen, and that's kind of was what happened to me. And I learned from that hey, using the creative side of me was kind of fun.
Okay, so you kind of brought that to the table, that kind of new recipe that increased margins and that kind of thing, huh? That was a little bit of your.
Yeah.
And I know you were really drawn to
Yeah.
business as a young guy, right? Tell us that story before you started Lifesong. Give us a little more of that career story.
Yeah. What happened that led to Lifesong
Yeah, or
before?
just yeah. However you want to tell that career story before Lifesong.
Yeah. So what happened in that journey, Jeff, is that first of all, I start for Dad right out of college, kind of a scared kid. Then I learned how by doing a few things, the business really model just totally changed. And then at one point, I was in Champaign, Illinois, which is about an hour from us. And I'm not even sure why I was there, but I was at a craft cheese plant, which is the national craft cheese. And I remember walking from room to room and seeing all the processes and realizing this was when I was roughly 33 in that range. Um, just realizing how much bigger the food business was than the feed business. So at that point, I told my wife Marla, who I've been married now 48 years. I'm very thankful for that, and we've got 16
Congratulations.
grandkids for that
Awesome.
in. I told her, we got to get into the food business. So I looked around and found somebody that it was a lady that wanted to make donut sugar. She worked for a donut sugar company, and I'm talking the white donut sugar. But
Yeah.
she had a dream. Yeah, her dream was to make different flavors of donut sugar, but she needed somebody to blend it for her. So I figured we knew how to blend feed. We can blend donut sugar.
Sure.
And so we started a separate company in a machine shed at the other side of Gridley here. And it was called Ringer Foods. So we had Ringer Feeds and we had Ringer Foods. And Dad and I, at that point in my early 30s, were 50% in each. And I was pretty much running the businesses because Dad was involved at this point in church as a. And what happened to me is I was sharing with Marla, the food business is so big. I was dreaming big. And I told Marla, we're going to get rich and I'm going to retire at 40 and we're going to live the American dream. And so that was kind of the mindset. But as we did that, and by the way, oh, you were frozen there for a little bit.
It's okay.
Okay, so I'll go back, but right there, I saw you frozen. I thought, are we having I don't know if that's me, but anyway, your editors can take care of that. So I'll go back a little bit. So I was telling Marla, this is going to be big, babe. We're going to get rich, and I'm going to retire at 40. But as we started Ringer Foods, excuse me, what happened is we were losing money, number one. And number two, we were making donut sugar. After it left our plant, it was going to be eaten by people. And it wasn't going to get cooked. And I was realizing I didn't know what I was doing. And I started freaking out. Primarily, we were losing money, but about food safety. Then we got into pattern, and I would guess this lasted, Jeff, for 4 to 5 months, where pretty much every night about 1 o'clock, I'd wake up in a cold sweat. And I just always remember the sensation. I can't quite explain it, but it was like I could feel my heart beating in my head. And I would lay there just stressing out, thinking all kinds of dark thoughts like, God forbid, we're going to kill somebody, we're losing this money. And then it happened, because it happened almost every night, I got sleep deprived. And then when you get sleep deprived, I remember Dad would quote Vince Lombardi. You maybe know this quote, but Vince Lombardi said, fatigue makes cowards of us all. And that was certainly true in my life. And then I just slipped into pretty serious depression. I even had thoughts of suicide. I was never close to that because of my love for the Lord and my dear wife, and we had 3 girls. But I just say that as to point out that I was really a mess. That it really taught me the fine line between being okay mentally and being a mess, because I was a mess. And then I wanted to quit because I knew the stress was and the sleepless nights was causing that, but I couldn't get a piece of that. Part of it, I always like to say, was probably my pride. I didn't want to fail. But part of it was, I believe the Holy Spirit was convicting me. And ultimately it led to, I wrote a contract with God on a piece of paper. And basically the contract said, Lord, if you bless Ringer Foods, I always like to share that I did it with the company that had no value. I didn't do it with Ringer Feeds that did have value. I made the contract.
I'm giving you all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm giving you all of my failed business. And the contract said if Ringer Foods ever became successful and we sold it, we would pay ourselves back with 8% interest, and anything over and above that would be used for ministry purposes. Not knowing what that would mean, but it was a contract and it was handwritten. But Dad and I both signed and dated it. And that was a life-changing contract for me.
Wow. But what I love, for a creative guy, that's a very specific financial metric. Okay. Paying ourselves back 8% interest.
Yeah.
I love the specificity of it. Okay, so now we got to hear the rest of the story. So what happened?
Yeah, in my little book that you mentioned, I write about the contract, but then I write about 6 unexpected blessings. And the number one blessing was this. When I talk to youth, I tell this is my number one blessing. Before that, Jeff, I never prayed a lot about, Lord, guide me with Ringer Foods so I can get rich and retire at 40. But now I was in this more tangible partnership with an almighty business partner. And when you get into depression like I was, it takes a while and you don't just get out of it. And I'll say this about prayer. I didn't pray that much about business. I'm sure I did some, but prayer was more of a discipline. And it was a daily practice. Definitely, I believed in it, but it was like when I prayed, I had to be very focused. And if my mind would wander, it would be like I'd slap my hand. I got to focus here. I'm praying. Um, that was before. Now here afterwards, um, about that time, I read a book about that had essays from early Christians, and these guys were right after Christ, and some of them were martyred for their faith, so they were serious Christians. And a couple of the essays in that book were on the Lord's Prayer.
Mm.
So I'm probably you, Jeff. I had memorized the Lord's Prayer, but it wasn't the way I prayed. So
Right.
what happened is, and I did this morning, I had a hot tub, and we lived out in the country, so it was private. And whether I do it inside or outside, but I would typically go outside to the hot tub first thing in the morning. Even now, this morning when I woke up thinking about some things I'm doing, I felt kind of overwhelmed till I get out of bed. That's just kind of the way I am. But I wake up in the morning with this ringer foods, overwhelmed. I'd go stumble out to the hot tub, and I'd start immediately, Our Father which art in heaven. And I had read a book by Bill Bright. You remember Bill
Oh,
Bright,
yeah.
Campus Crusades,
Yeah.
and he wrote a book, God Discover His Character. And he had 13 characters, and I say them every day. He's almighty, he's all-knowing, he's omnipresent, he's sovereign. Kind of that's who God is. He's truth, he's just, he's righteous, he's holy, he's faithful, he's never changing, he's love and mercy, and he knows me. So immediately that's calming as I reflect on
Yeah.
that.
Right.
Then the next part is, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, and on earth as it is in heaven. And then immediately, I'm saying, I don't know what I'm doing. Your will, not mine. And then give us today our daily bread. Then I would bring up things. And another book on prayer I read talked about praying for your mission, praying for your family, and praying for other people. So I kind of would do it in that order. And when I would pray about the mission, I would ask him questions about what this, and then I would just kind of reflect. Um, and then a couple other points when I would pray, give us today, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors through the years. If I had something against somebody, that God would bring that to mind. But I guess the point is, Jeff, is prayer went from being roughly a 5 to 10 minute discipline to the favorite part of my day. And typically I hang out in the tub 45 minutes to plus, maybe up to half hour to an hour, let's say. And a lot of that time is thinking and my mind wanders, but it's just kind of like hanging out with my father, and it's become the favorite part of my day. And that was a game changer. And then I started to have experiences, still made a lot of mistakes in the journey, but had my experiences where I felt him leading in a much more tangible way than I had typically had before the contract. It really was the depth of my relationship with the Father went to a different level.
Sounds like sometimes I think about it like a pipeline almost, or that. Of course, I live in Houston, so we talk a lot about pipelines around here. But a pipeline, and you're just trying to clear out the pipeline, And as our relationship with God gets better, it's like the wisdom was always available, but I think I had a lot of the same experiences earlier in my life, and I think I clogged the pipeline by my own
Yeah.
behavior, and he's looking for that clean pipeline to deliver the wisdom. You just had to clean it out. How do you kind of think about that, or just to?
Yeah, I definitely think that. And I also think there's something special about being in trouble, if you will.
Unfortunately, that's true, right?
Yeah, there's a Matthew 5:3. I won't be able to quote it exactly, but it's basically where Jesus said in the NIV, or it will say, "Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. In the message, I like the way the message says it. It says something to this effect: when you're blessed are those who are at the end of their rope,
Right.
because when you're there, there's more ability to let go and let God. It doesn't say it that way. But when I was at the kind of the end of my rope, then it was like it's easy to surrender. Yeah, I can't do it. I'm lost. And and that's what really happened to me. And then that unclogged, that surrender. Surrender is the key to opening that pipeline.
I like that. Surrender is the key, and unfortunately, it does usually. Don't we just generally learn more in those tough times, and so. All right, so what are some of the little things that happen to unclog the business, shall we say?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I a lot of times tell a couple stories that just showed how God would, and God, through that, I just learned how God is such a personal God.
Yes.
I mean, I knew that before, but first of all, the donut sugar idea never worked.
Okay.
Um, but we ultimately got into extruding, which is a cooker of sorts, and making different types of products. Towards the end, our main product was we made Rice Crisp. But at one point in that journey, we got an order from Nestle, which was like one of the first big orders we had, and we're here in a little town, and they had some. What was great for working for big companies is they had good quality assurance people that knew and they could guide us in the process. But anyway, we were making it. We had already made some product. They had 3 people coming up from St. Louis to visit us, and I always remember. And back in those days, you still do this if you're making food. We would test it for bacteria and send it out. And literally, Jeff, I'm saying within 5 minutes before those folks walked in, we were a young company. I had a young quality assurance lady, pretty freshly out of college, and we had 2 plants. And she called me up. I was at the office, and she called me up crying, saying, "Gary, we tested for listeria."
Oh no.
Which was a bacteria, and I didn't hardly know what it was. But it was kind of like what I had always feared would happen. And so I walk into this meeting and then they show up. And I basically, transparency always been a thing that I believe in, but there was no choice anyway. I couldn't help but be transparent. They were no. And they were great. They basically explained that it's a 2-part test. I didn't know this. The first test says, okay, you take this and it shows you there's a possibility, then you have to take the second one to tell you if you really have it. Well, I went home from that meeting, so we were going to have to take a second test and then we're going to find out.
Right.
I went home from that meeting just defeated, and I told Marla this could be the end of Ringer Foods.
Right.
And of course, she's used to me going up and down a little bit. And
Yeah.
I don't remember for sure what she said, but she probably said, just go to the hot tub and relax. Well,
right.
the rest of the story is right beside my hot tub, there was a Reader's Digest. Remember Reader's Digest?
Oh yeah.
A non-Christian magazine, but a good magazine.
Yeah.
But it's basically just a general magazine. But they had for an article on prayer. And I had been reading it the day before, and it was from doctors. They were realizing that when people prayed, they got better, and there was some research done. So that's what I had read, and so I picked up that article and started reading again because I hadn't finished it. And literally, Jeff, within the paragraph or 2 after I started reading again, it said something to this effect. Even more controversial are research studies showing that prayer can change bacteria results in labs. Now, even more controversial, this is what the Reader's Digest said, are is studies showing prayer can change bacteria results in lab. Now,
Wow.
that to me shows how personal God is. I had never ever read a statement like that in my life. I have never read it since.
No, I've never. It almost doesn't even go together, you know. Like, I mean, it does, but that's a weird thing to be in there.
Yeah, I took a picture of it. I have that.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I just felt like, uh, God was just saying, "I got this. Don't need to
Yep.
worry about it."
Yep.
And so I called up my brother and a couple people, and I said, "I don't know what's going to happen, but I know we're supposed to pray." So
Wow.
we prayed, and the test came back fine. I don't know to this day whether that was the prayer changed the test or if God was just showing me He's in control.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
It's above the pay
That's
grade.
the
You
first
know
one.
the point of that story.
Yeah, he knows the very hairs of my head. He knows what's going on.
That's
And
crazy.
so that was kind of a stepping stone in the journey. And yeah, that's one of the stories where God showed up in an unusual way.
Wow. I love that. I do find that to be I've had those experiences myself. I'm sure most of the people, if they're walking with God long enough, they feel those super personal moments like that where you're like, did that really happen? Like you have to write those down. So I'm glad you did.
Yeah,
All right, so take us to the transition. How do we get out of this business and into Lifesong?
sure. And I'm going to tell you one other story and how it led to that. So as time went on, the business did start being successful. We were
Okay.
making Rice Krispies for um, Chewy granola bars and for General Mills cereals, and we were in some M&M candy bars. Um, and so at one point, a private equity company actually approached us to sell,
Hmm. Yeah.
and I was ready to move on.
Yeah.
Um, and what happened, Jeff, is that Marla didn't feel at peace with it. She really
Wow.
didn't know much about it, but she just didn't feel good about it. And so one night we were driving on a Wednesday night to church, and we went by our little plant there. And I turned to Marla and I said, "I'm mad at you." And she said, "What? Why are you mad at me?" And I said, "Because I'd like to sell, but you're not at peace with this. And we don't do things that were major without being at peace with each other on it." And I said, "You don't understand, babe. We've got three primary customers. If you lose one, we're in trouble."
Right.
And and she said, "Well, Gary, you'll figure it out." So I said, "Right, that's easy for you to say." But that was pretty much our conversation when we were at church.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and within I would say the week, I was on a plane down to Arizona because that was where one of the plants we served was down in Phoenix. And I was reading a book by Chuck Swindoll, and Chuck had written a book called The Mystery of God's Will. And I was reading that because I was, seeking out on certain things. It's easy to know God's will, but on whether you sell business or not, that's hard to discern. It is kind of the mystery of God's will. But as I was flying, reading that book, there was a chapter where it talked about fear, and 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 he talked about how you should not make a major decision out of fear. And Timothy came to mind where he said, "God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." And in the plane there, I just knew that Marla was right. I was wanting to sail out of fear, and so I just had a peace. Yeah, we're not going to sell now. And so that night I was still down in Arizona, but I called up Marla and I said, "Hey, babe, I got something to tell you." And she said, "Wait, Gary, I have something to tell you." I said,
Oh,
"Okay." And she said, "I was listening to Dr. Dobson, and he was interviewing Chuck Swindoll, same author." And she said, he talked about don't do things in fear. And she quoted, as I recall, Timothy again, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind. And so then she said, kind of real cute, like, and Gary, I don't want you to be mad at me, but I don't want you selling out of fear. And then I had the privilege of saying, what happened to me? So we were just kind of
Wow.
like, God, again, is so personal. And within a year or two of that, we had both prayed and come to a peace that we were going to sell. And then in a very, again, miraculous way that I won't go just for the sake of time, God opened the door with a company, and it just moved very quickly and just came together. And the rest of the story, Jeff, is that first sale offer, it was a private equity company that gave me a small amount up front, and then I was going to have to stay there 5 years,
Right.
um, and then get the rest of it. And that company actually went broke. And I believe, and I don't know this is true, that we would have never got the payouts. I would have had to stay there longer because I sold within, I think, less than 2 years of that. It's my personal belief that if I wouldn't have listened to my wife there, and if Marla wouldn't have been here in the spirit, that Lifesong would have never happened. Because it just came together, and we sold it in 2002. And then based on just the prayer daily life, me and her both started praying about what we should focus on, and helping people adopt came to mind, and there was scripture. And we just, within a period of probably 3 to 4 months after we sold, got a piece that we wanted to focus on helping people adopt. And I had a mentor tell me, he said, don't, and there's nothing wrong with giving money to a large group of things, but his advice to me, this mentor, was don't give money broadly, be focused and involved in something. And so that made sense to us. And so we ultimately decided we were going to focus on helping folks adopt, even though we never adopted
I was
ourselves.
going to say, where do you think that came from?
Yeah, good question. I think part of it definitely was in the journey in our little church in Gridley. We have a tradition where we have a morning service, and then we have dinner together, and then we our lunch together, and then we had a second service. And there was a younger couple, and this was after Ringer Foods was going pretty well, but probably 3 to 5 years before we sold it. There was a young couple, Darren and Marie, and Marla and Marie were just kind of buddies, and they would a lot of times eat together at church. And I always remember one Sunday she came home and she had been talking to Marie, and they were wanting to adopt, but it was expensive, and they were going to have to borrow a bunch of money. And Marla, as I recall, stamped her foot. I don't know if she really did this, but stamped her foot and said, Gary, it's not right. No child should not have a home because of money, and we need to help them. And so we did help them. And then we're kind of had the privilege to see that little boy from Korea come home, live with them, knowing that we had played a small but a significant part of that. And that was one of the things God brought to mind. And then just there was scripture, there was another ministry that reached out to me that dealt with helping vulnerable children, and we just, God moved and made us think that way. And it made sense to me from a business thing. On adoption, it's expensive to adopt, but then once you adopt, then the family is God's plan. The couple takes care of the child. That just made sense to me from a strategic way to make a difference.
Well, there's a lot of leverage in it when you think about it.
Yeah.
Um, just it's a lifetime change for a small upfront investment if you want to think of it from a business. Is that kind of how you thought about it? Why did you make that business equation? That's interesting that you thought of it in business.
Yeah. I think that is the business mindset that business people have. We think strategically, and yeah, there's no better way to care for a child than in a family.
It changes generations, right? I mean,
Yeah,
a reasonably small investment up front can change, you know,
yeah.
generations.
And Proverbs says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he old, he will not depart from that. So yeah, we have a prayer at Lifesong that's broken down into three areas that God will connect us with people in general. When he said the fields are white with harvest, pray for more laborers. So we pray for more laborers, and then we pray teach us how to help them, guide us on that. But most of all, the third part is we pray for the kids that they have, that they will become disciples of Jesus and create a ripple that's greater than we can ask or imagine. So I love that ripple effect. If you
Yeah, for sure.
get a child, a vulnerable child, into the home, and also there's just a lot of scripture where God has a heart for the least, and what's
Yeah,
more least than a child forsaken.
yeah. Uh, what part of the adoption chain, if you will, does Lifesong focus on? How would you sort of describe the niche?
Yeah, our niche is we're not an adoption agency. What we do though is we help adoptive families raise money. And what we do, and we work with churches too, we help them have adoption funds. Um, and what we do is we give matching grants to families that are in the adopting process. They still have to ask for money for help, but we match, up to whatever the matching grant is. Say it's $5,000 or $7,000.
Yep.
If they raise $5,000 and they get 10, they get five. And so it's really stimulated that. And they say, I don't know where our team got this statistic, but they say something like many of the Christian families have thought about adoption, but I believe the statistic is only 1 in 30 ever do it. And that the high cost of adoption is one of the key things that keep them from doing it. So we're just trying to remove that hurdle.
Love it. Love it. Well, we'd love to hear more about Lifesong down the road. And hey, before we kind of wrap it up, give us a little. What's up with the book? Why'd you write this book, Radical Business? Tell us what was the root of that, and kind of where's your heart on speaking to younger business people?
Yeah. Well, part of it was well, Andy, who works with me, asked me to write it as because we were getting into some business ventures, and he wanted me to write, kind of share some of the stories that I shared with you. And I didn't want to do it, but again, my wonderful helpmate, Marla, she woke up in the middle of the night and she wrote basically the back cover on there. And it starts with "I love spreadsheets." I love to dream with spreadsheets. And it says, I love spreadsheets. She wrote the back cover, and the next morning she showed it to me and she said, "Gary, I felt like it was a little nudge." And so that started that, it's a short book. It's kind of like a devotion, talks about the contract and six unexpected blessings and kind of a how-to. So that's how the book happened. But my heart is, you'll recall Blackaby books, I probably experiencing God, and
Yeah.
his main thesis was if you want to experience God, see where he's moving and join in that movement. And my personal conviction is that the younger generation is much more in tune to using business as mission than mine was. And I want to help be a stimulus and be used by God in any way I can to help that movement, if you will, that God is creating, because I believe that business can really be used effectively as a discipleship tool and as a giving engine for ministry. That's my heart. I believe I want to be used by God with that movement that He's creating towards business.
Well, that might be a good segue into this last question. We always ask is maybe just a practical piece of advice for somebody behind you on the journey. And so, if for you that is a piece of advice for a younger business person that what do you wish you knew maybe at 30 that you know now in the book, or you can take it another direction. What's a piece of advice you'd have for somebody behind you on the journey here?
Yeah, I'll say one thing real quick, and then I'll give a
Yeah,
practical.
maybe two of them. Something for a business principle, and then do another one if you want.
So my first thing is what I've already talked about is prayer. When I talk to people, I mean that was just a game changer to have God involved in the business, but that has made much more and just have that personal time with the Father every day.
Yes.
That is made much more effective if the business has the right purpose.
Right.
So what I like to, I do feel like the contract was a big deal. There's a business thought process that they say, and just general, begin with the end in mind. I'm sure you've
Yeah.
heard that. And um, what I'm so thankful is that I wrote it down.
Yeah.
And then that held us accountable. And the
Yeah.
rest of the story on that too is, Jeff, my dad, who was my main spiritual mentor in life and just a wonderful father and a believer. When we got to the point, he was 50% owner in Ringer Foods. And when we got to the point that we were selling it, Dad had not been up all the sleepless nights and he had signed the contract, but he had forgot about it. And so, yeah. So he said, Gary, you do what you want with your half, but I'm not going to do that with my half. And, he had 3 kids, so you're going to get some of it back anyway.
Right.
And so I said, Dad, don't you remember the contract? No, he forgot totally about it. So I showed it to him.
He had signed it?
And he had signed it, yeah.
Oh.
And so then as soon as he saw it, oh, yeah, no, he didn't want to go against, he had made a vow.
Good for him.
Yeah. So that's my point is I would say my main piece of advice outside of just what we all know is to have a really close relationship with the Father is to begin with that end in mind, think what you want to do, write it down and have some people hold you accountable to that. And it's much easier, in my opinion, to make that decision when you're starting a business than once it's very successful. So that would be my main piece of advice is make a contract.
I love it.
Hold yourself accountable.
I love it. Well, Gary, this has been a real joy. Thanks so much for being with us and sharing your story. I know it'll be a blessing to many.
Yeah, well, thank you. Appreciate what you're doing.
No, thank you. And thanks everybody for joining us on this week's Generous Business Owner podcast. Share it with a friend, subscribe, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.